They thought I was too old to matter, too quiet to fight back, too blind to see what they were doing. But they were wrong. The night they betrayed me, something inside me woke up. Something I thought had died years ago. You don't steal a man's legacy and expect him to die quietly. Not me, not Tom Walker. I remember the way they smiled at me that night. My grandsons, Lucas and Ryan, standing in my living room pretending to care while slipping papers across the table. "Just a formality, Grandpa," Lucas said. His voice had that slick salesman tone he inherited from his father. My late son, God rest his greedy soul. Ryan avoided my eyes, mumbling about simplifying the estate. Simplifying. That was his word for stealing. The papers they wanted me to sign would transfer the deed of my farm, 120 acres of land my father carved out of stone with his bare hands, into their trust. They said it was to protect me. Protect me from what, I wanted to ask. From taxes, from time, from myself. But when I looked at them, those two boys I'd raised after their mother died, I saw something colder than greed. I saw entitlement. They believed it all belonged to them already. I didn't sign that night. My hands trembled, and I told them I needed time. Lucas's smile tightened. "Of course, Grandpa. Take all the time you need." Ryan put his arm around me on the way out, squeezing too hard. "We just want what's best for you," he whispered. The door closed, and the house felt smaller than ever. The tick of the clock was the only sound, steady and cruel. I sat in my chair, staring at the family photos lining the wall. My wife, Helen, in her garden, her laugh frozen in color. My son, Mark, in his uniform before he turned into a stranger. The boys, small and innocent, running through the same cornfields they now wanted to sell. I wondered when love had turned into calculation, when family had become a transaction. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind outside screamed against the windows like a warning. My bones ached, but my mind wouldn't rest. I poured myself a glass of Helen's blackberry wine, the last bottle we'd made together before she died, and sat by the fire. I thought about the time I'd taught Lucas to drive my old truck, how proud he'd been. How Ryan used to cry at thunderstorms, and I'd let him sleep on the couch beside me. Those memories had weight, and I realized then that's what they were trying to take, not just land, my history, my meaning. 2 weeks later, I overheard them talking outside the hardware store. They didn't see me. I was sitting in my truck with the window cracked. Lucas was on the phone saying, "Once we get the old man's signature, we'll list it right away. Developers are offering nearly $2 million for the property. Yeah, the nursing home story works if we push it." My heart stopped. The nursing home story. They were planning to declare me unfit, sell the land, and dump me somewhere to die quietly. I didn't feel old anymore. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The blood in my veins burned like it used to when I was young and foolish and still believed in justice. That night I opened the chest under my bed, the one Helen had called my bad ideas box. Inside were the things I'd never thrown away. A bundle of old deeds, letters, the original title to the farm, and a flash drive my lawyer had given me years ago when we updated the estate plan. I plugged it into my ancient laptop, and there it was. The digital copy of the will Helen and I had written together, leaving everything not to our son, not to anyone, but to the local children's hospital that had saved her life once upon a time. I'd changed it years later under pressure from Mark. That was my mistake. But the original still existed. So did I. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Grady. "You still got that safe deposit box in town?" He sounded surprised. "I do. Why?" "I'm going to need to make a few changes, and—" "Grady, let's keep this between us." There was a pause, then his quiet laugh. "You always did like a little mystery, Tom." For the next month, I played the part of the fragile old man. I let them believe they were winning. I nodded through their visits, listened to their rehearsed concern, and pretended I didn't notice when they started moving my things into boxes. "We're just organizing," Ryan said. I smiled and thanked him because revenge tastes better when it's patient. Every night I wrote letters, one to each of them, one to my lawyer, one to the local paper, one to the hospital board. I hid them in a lockbox under the floorboards of my bedroom next to Helen's photo. I wasn't planning to die soon, but if they wanted a ghost, I'd give them one that would haunt them forever. On the 1st of October, Lucas came by with the papers again. "We've scheduled the notary, Grandpa. Let's get this wrapped up." I looked up from my chair, feigning confusion. "Wrapped up?" He sighed, fake patient. "The transfer. You said you'd sign." "Did I?" I asked softly. Ryan appeared behind him, holding coffee and that same polite smile. "It's for your peace of mind. You can't handle all this paperwork anymore." I laughed. That startled them. It had been a long time since they had heard me laugh. "You're right," I said. "I'm tired of paperwork. Let's do it tomorrow." That night, I drove out to the hill behind the barn, the same hill where Helen and I used to watch the sunset. From there, I could see the whole farm, the golden fields, the barn lights flickering, the world they'd never earned. I whispered to Helen, "They think I'm done, love." But they forgot who taught them how to lie. The next day I went into town, updated my will again, and handed Mr. Grady a sealed envelope. "Don't open this until you hear I'm gone," I told him, "and when you do, make sure they're watching." When I returned home, the boys were waiting, papers ready. I smiled, signed where they told me, but not before swapping the documents when they weren't looking. They got what they wanted all right, just not the version they expected, because the moment they filed those papers, they wouldn't inherit a farm. They'd inherit a lawsuit, and that was just the beginning. As they left, Lucas clapped my shoulder. "You won't regret this, Grandpa." I looked him straight in the eye for the first time in years. "Oh, I think I will, just not the way you think." When the door shut behind them, I poured another glass of wine and raised it to the empty room. "To Helen," I said quietly, "let's give the boys a lesson they'll never forget." Outside, the sky rumbled. The storm was coming, and for once, I wasn't afraid of it. By morning, the storm had passed, but the world smelled of rain and vengeance. I watched the sunrise through the kitchen window, the fields glistening like they knew what was coming. I had 24 hours before Lucas and Ryan tried to file those papers. 24 hours to make sure my plan would leave them choking on their own greed. I started by calling Grady. "Did you file the copy I gave you yesterday?" I asked. "It's in the vault," he replied. "Exactly as you instructed." "Good," I said, "because today I'm going to give you the other half of the story. You see, years ago, before Helen got sick, I'd bought up a few parcels of land on the outskirts of our farm. They were small, rocky, worthless back then, but I'd kept the deeds under my name, hidden in a box under the false floor of my tool shed. No one ever knew, not even Mark, not even Helen. When the state built the new highway, that land turned out to be sitting right on top of a planned industrial access road. The government offered to buy it for nearly $5 million last year. I turned them down, because I wasn't ready to let go of anything yet. But now it was time to use it. I drove out to the shed in my old pickup, the same one Lucas always mocked, that rusted coffin on wheels. I lifted the planks, pulled out the metal box, and brushed the dust away. Inside were the deeds, a folded note Helen had written me before she died, and a single photo of the boys as children, both of them sitting in the dirt, smiling, covered in mud. I stared at that picture for a long while before tucking it into my pocket. Even anger can't erase love entirely. That's what makes revenge dangerous. You have to be careful not to burn the part of your heart you still want to keep. By noon, the boys were already moving fast. I got a call from a clerk at the county office, an old friend named Sylvia. "Tom, your grandsons were just here. They tried filing some transfer documents, but something didn't look right. They were copies, not originals." I smiled into the receiver. "Imagine that," I said. "Must have been a mix-up. Should I hold them?" "Hold everything," I said. "You'll want to see what comes next." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the rush of a plan working. I wasn't just getting even, I was taking back my name. That night, Lucas called. His voice was tight, impatient. "Grandpa, we had some issues with the paperwork. The clerk said they weren't valid. Did you sign a different set?" "I don't recall," I said. "You boys brought so many papers, I just signed where you pointed." There was silence, then a hiss of frustration. "Well, we'll straighten it out tomorrow." "I'm sure you will," I said, and hung up before he could. The next morning, I drove into town early. The sky was pale blue, calm. The courthouse smelled of dust and coffee. I met Grady in his office and handed him the second envelope, the one labeled for public release. "What's in this one?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "Proof," I said, "and a little history lesson." Inside that envelope were copies of the original deeds showing I still owned every inch of the farmland and the adjoining lots. But there was more. Photographs, dated records, and Helen's old letter. That letter was the key. In it, she'd written about her dream of turning part of our land into a community center for children, a place where they could learn, grow, and find safety. Something she'd always wanted after losing our daughter so young. I'd never built it. I'd always told myself I was too busy. But now, her dream was going to rise from the ashes of their greed. I left Grady's office and went straight to the hospital board meeting that afternoon. I'd known the chairman, Dr. Lang, for 30 years. "Tom," he said warmly when I walked in. "What brings you here?" "I'm ready to finish what Helen started," I said, handing him a folder. "But I want to make it big, not just a center, an entire foundation." His eyebrows lifted as he flipped through the documents. "Tom, this is extraordinary, but are you sure about this? It's nearly everything you own." I smiled. "Not everything, just everything worth taking." By evening, the news had already spread. The Clearwater Gazette ran the story online first. Local farmer donates entire estate to build children's foundation. I printed the headline, taped it to my refrigerator, and poured myself a glass of whiskey. It felt like hearing Helen laugh again. But revenge stories don't end in silence. They end with echoes. At 10 that night, headlights flared through my window. The boys' truck skidded into the driveway. Doors slammed. Angry voices filled the air. "Grandpa!" Lucas shouted, storming into the house before I could even stand. "What the hell did you do?" Ryan followed, eyes wide, face pale. "The paper says you gave everything away. Tell me it's not true." I leaned back in my chair. "Sit down, boys." Lucas slammed his fist on the table. "You've lost your damn mind. That land was supposed to stay in the family." "It is staying in the family," I said quietly. "In Helen's family, the one that remembers what love means." Ryan's voice cracked. "You tricked us." I nodded slowly. "You tried to steal from me. I just played the game better." Lucas's face twisted with fury. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, standing to meet his glare. "But at least I'll regret something I did right." They left with threats, their tires spitting gravel as they tore down the road. I watched their red taillights fade into the dark, then turn back to the quiet of my house. The clock ticked. The wind whispered through the old wood walls. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to be alone. The next day I drove out to the hill again. The land stretched before me like memory, every inch of it soaked with history, laughter, and loss. I knelt in the grass and pressed my hand into the soil. "They'll come after me, Helen," I whispered, "but I've buried something deeper than they can ever dig." Because beneath that hill, under a concrete slab, no one but me and Grady knew existed, were the legal trust documents transferring full ownership of the property, including mineral rights, to the foundation. Even if I died tomorrow, even if they tried to contest it, the law would hold. The land was gone from their reach forever. But there was one last piece of the plan, the part they'd never see coming. I'd rewritten my final letter, the one meant to be opened after my death. And in that letter, I told them the truth about the land they'd tried to steal, that it hid something more valuable than money, something that would make them realize too late what they'd thrown away. Because revenge isn't just about taking back what's yours, it's about making them live with the ghost of what they lost. And soon, they'd learn exactly what that meant. The following week felt like the calm before another storm. The papers had printed the story twice now, and everyone in Clearwater seemed to have an opinion about old Tom Walker and his act of generosity. At the grocery store, people smiled at me, patted my shoulder, called me a hero. "You did good, Tom," they said. "Helen would be proud." But behind every compliment, I could feel the boys' anger growing like thunder in the distance. On the third day, a black SUV pulled into my drive. Lucas stepped out first, clean-shaven, expensive coat, trying to look composed. Ryan followed behind, quieter, eyes darting. They didn't knock this time. They walked straight in. "Grandpa," Lucas started, his tone oily smooth. the way con men talk when they're trying to sound civilized. We need to talk. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice even. He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Look, we were upset last time. We said things we didn't mean. But this donation thing, it's not legal. The estate wasn't finalized. We've spoken to an attorney in the city who thinks we can challenge it. I sipped my coffee. You can challenge all you want, but Helen's foundation owns the deeds now. That's a fact. Ryan shifted uneasily. Grandpa, we're family. You don't have to do this to us. I set my cup down. Family, I said quietly. You stopped being that the moment you tried to steal from me. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Lucas's face darkened. If you think you can humiliate us like this and walk away clean, you're mistaken. I leaned back in my chair. Son, I said softly, I've been humiliated plenty in my life, but never by men who still owe me their diapers. Ryan swallowed hard, but Lucas only glared. We'll see you in court. Then they left, the sound of their boots pounding across the porch like a drumbeat of hate. The moment their truck disappeared down the road, I exhaled slowly. The fear I'd expected never came. Instead, there was only resolve. I had one last thing to do, something I'd put off for too long. Down by the east pasture, behind the old oak, there was a shed so weathered it looked ready to crumble. Inside it was a locked door leading underground, a storm cellar from the 1930s that my father had built and sealed off decades ago. Most folks thought it was filled with old tools and junk, but I knew better. I took the key from around my neck, the one Helen had once asked about years ago. That old key still means something, she'd teased. I'd smiled and told her it was for the past. A lie, but one told in love. Now, as I pushed open the creaking door, dust swirled in the air like ghosts. The stairs groaned under my boots as I descended into the dim light. The smell of earth was strong, damp, and honest. I reached the concrete slab in the center of the floor and brushed away the dirt. There it was, the sealed vault I'd poured myself after Helen's funeral. A small metal box embedded in the foundation, welded shut. But I had the tools to open it. When the hinges finally gave, I knelt and lifted the lid. Inside were three things: a folded map of the property, a flash drive in a plastic sleeve, and a single letter, yellowed but untouched. The letter was from my father. I hadn't read it since I was 20. Tom, it began, if you're reading this, you've already learned that land isn't just soil, it's memory. Beneath our fields runs an old survey line, one they never fixed right when the mining company left in 1947. There's copper down there, lots of it, but don't sell it to just anyone. The land carries a curse for those who take more than they give. Protect it, son. Use it when the time's right. My hands trembled as I read it again. I'd forgotten all about that letter, dismissed the old man's words as superstition. But now it struck me like lightning. The land wasn't just valuable, it was sitting on millions in untouched copper deposits. The boys had no idea. The flash drive contained the geological surveys I'd commissioned quietly years ago, confirming every word. If the foundation ever tapped that resource, it could fund the hospital for decades. I smiled. Helen's dream had just grown bigger than either of us imagined. That night, I sat by the fire again, watching the flames dance. I wasn't angry anymore. I felt something else. Justice. Not revenge for its own sake, but justice shaped by patience. The boys wanted gold. They'd never understand that the real treasure was buried deeper, where only time and purpose could reach it. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was Grady. "You'd better sit down, Tom," he said. "Your grandsons filed an injunction. They're claiming you're mentally unfit." I laughed softly. "Of course they are." "There's going to be a hearing next week," he continued. "They're bringing in a doctor to testify." "Let them," I said. "I'll bring proof of my own." After we hung up, I called Sylvia at the clerk's office. "You still have the video file I gave you?" She chuckled. "The one labeled, 'For my ungrateful heirs.'" "Oh yes, Tom. It's ready whenever you say the word." "Good," I said. "Next week, make sure the court sees it first." The day of the hearing, I wore my best suit, the one I'd worn at Helen's funeral. My hands shook slightly as I tied the knot, but my mind was clear. At 79, I had more fire in me than either of those boys combined. When I entered the courthouse, Lucas and Ryan were already there with their lawyer, some slick young man in a tailored suit who looked at me like I was a museum piece. Lucas smirked, whispering something to Ryan, who looked pale and uncertain. The judge, an old friend of mine, nodded respectfully. "Mr. Walker," he said, "we're here to determine your mental capacity and the validity of your recent donations." "Understood," I said, steady. Their lawyer went first, parading a psychologist who barely knew my name. He talked about possible cognitive decline and confusion in the elderly. Lucas nodded along like a snake pretending to prey. Then it was my turn. Grady stood, calm as ever. "Your Honor," he said, "with your permission, we'd like to play a video recorded by Mr. Walker 2 weeks ago." The judge agreed. The screen flickered to life, and there I was, sitting at my kitchen table, looking straight into the camera. "If you're watching this," my recorded voice said, "my grandsons have probably dragged me into court again. They think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am, but I still remember the day I pulled both of them out of the river when they were 9. I remember how they cried, not from fear, but from guilt because they'd ignored my warning about the current. That's what this is, ignoring warnings. I might be old, but I'm not blind. I see their greed, and I want the court to know. Everything I've done, every signature, every donation, was by choice and with full mind. The land is no longer theirs because they never respected it." When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked from me to them and back again. "Mr. Walker seems lucid to me," he said finally. "Case dismissed." Lucas's face turned crimson. Ryan looked like he might cry. I rose, nodded politely to the judge, and walked out with Grady at my side. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I said nothing to them. I didn't need to. The story was already writing itself. That night, the sky opened up with rain again. I stood by the window, watching the fields glisten under lightning. I felt Helen's presence beside me, calm, approving. "I did it, love," I whispered. "The boys are done, the land's safe, but something tells me they're not finished with me yet." And I was right. Because the next morning, I found a note taped to my door. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "You may have won in court, old man, but we're not done. You'll regret crossing your own blood." I folded the note, tucked it into my pocket, and smiled. They had no idea what I had buried beneath their feet. The morning after that note appeared, the world looked calm, too calm. I'd lived long enough to know that quiet often meant something was about to break. The storm had passed, but the air carried that strange tension, the kind that crawls under your skin and whispers trouble's coming. I made myself coffee, fed the barn cats, and went about my chores as usual, but my mind kept circling back to those boys, my grandsons, my blood, my betrayers. I still couldn't understand how love had turned into greed so completely. I had raised them after their mother died, given them everything I had left, and now they wanted to bury me before I was even gone. Around noon, I saw the dust trail of a car speeding down the road, a sleek black sedan, not their truck. When it stopped at my gate, I recognized the man who stepped out, a stranger in a city suit, tall and sharp-eyed. He looked like he'd never set foot on a farm in his life. He walked up the path, brushing dust off his shoes. "Mr. Walker?" he said. "That depends on who's asking," I said. "My name's Harold Kent. I represent your grandsons. They've made me an offer to negotiate on their behalf." I smiled faintly. "Negotiation? I thought we already settled that in court." He adjusted his tie. "They're willing to make peace, provided you reconsider the donation and transfer the estate back into family control. They're offering a monthly stipend for your comfort." My laugh startled him. It came from somewhere deep in my chest, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from myself since before Helen died. "A stipend? So they'll pay me to pretend they love me?" He hesitated. "They're concerned about your well-being." "Son," I said, stepping closer, "if you see those boys again, tell them this. The only thing that concerns me now is whether they'll find enough soul left to live with what they've done." The lawyer's jaw tightened. "Then you're refusing?" "Flat out." He sighed. "Then I'll warn you. They're desperate, Mr. Walker, and desperate men don't always play fair." He left after that, and for the first time in years, I locked every door before sunset. I wasn't afraid of dying, but I wanted to choose how it happened. That night, I sat by the fire again. Helen's picture on the mantel. The wind outside had turned cold, whistling through the cracks in the walls like an old hymn. I poured a small glass of whiskey and whispered, "You'd probably tell me to forgive them, wouldn't you, Helen?" But the only answer was the creak of the house settling, and I knew forgiveness wasn't in me anymore. By midnight, I heard the sound, a car engine idling near the barn, then voices. I moved quietly, careful not to make the floorboards groan. Through the curtain, I saw flashlights dancing across the yard. Two shadows, tall, moving with purpose. Lucas and Ryan. I should have been angry. I should have called the sheriff right then. But instead, I watched, curious, like a man studying his own eulogy. They were arguing, their voices just loud enough to carry. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan hissed. "Yes," Lucas snapped. "We scare him. He signs. He's too stubborn to reason with." "Scare him how?" "Doesn't matter. We'll make it look like an accident if it gets messy." Those words hit like a cold knife. If it gets messy, my own flesh and blood, planning harm like it was business. I didn't wait for them to come closer. I slipped my boots on, took my flashlight, and walked out onto the porch, the boards groaning under my weight. "Evening, boys," I called out, loud enough to make them freeze. Their light swung toward me, blinding for a second. Lucas's voice came next, uneven. "Grandpa, we were just checking the barn. Thought we saw someone snooping around." "Funny," I said. "That's exactly what I was thinking." I walked down the steps slowly. "So, what's the plan tonight? You come all this way to scare an old man?" Ryan's face fell. "It's not like that." "Then what's it like?" I asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the two boys I raised came to finish what they started. Lucas stepped forward, frustration burning in his eyes. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. That land should have been ours." "Should have been," I repeated softly. "You talk about it like I owed it to you. You ever think maybe you owed me something first?" He hesitated. "We worked that farm. You worked for money, I worked for legacy. There's a difference." For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then Lucas shook his head. "You're crazy. You'd rather give everything to strangers than your own blood?" I took a step closer until our faces were inches apart. "You stopped being my blood the day you tried to make me disappear." That broke something in him. He shoved past me, muttering curses, and Ryan followed. Their taillights vanished into the night again, but I knew that wasn't the end. The next morning, I called Sheriff Avery, an old friend who'd known me since high school. I told him everything. He promised to keep an eye out and asked if I wanted him to send a deputy. I told him no. If the boys wanted to come for me again, they'd find me waiting. But even I didn't expect what came next. 2 nights later, around 2 a.m., I woke to smoke. Not much at first, just a faint sting in the air, then the crackle, then the light. The barn was on fire. Flames climbed into the sky like an angry god. I stumbled out into the yard, the heat hitting my face, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. That barn had stood for 80 years, every board, every nail, every memory, burning. And in that orange glow, I saw a truck speeding away down the road. Lucas's. My heart didn't break. It hardened. There was no saving the barn, but I could save what came next. I grabbed my phone, called the fire department, then went inside and pulled open the desk drawer, the map from the vault, the surveys, the letter from my father. I laid them out across the kitchen table, the flames outside reflecting in the window. "This ends tonight," I whispered. By dawn, the barn was ash. The fire crew left, shaking their heads, thinking it was some electrical fault. The sheriff came later, asked questions I already knew the answers to. That evening, when the smoke had thinned and the fields were quiet again, I wrote one last letter, to Lucas and Ryan. "You burned the barn, but not the truth. The land beneath it holds more than dirt. It holds every lesson you ignored. You can try to destroy what I built, but you'll never own it, because it was never about ownership. It was about heart, and you never had one." I signed it and sealed it with wax, the way Helen used to seal her letters. Then I called Grady. "Activate the trust," I said. "All of it, effective immediately." "You sure, Tom?" he asked softly, as sure as a dying man can be. Because I could feel it then, something closing in. Maybe it was time, maybe it was justice. When I hung up, I looked out at the blackened barn, at the field stretching beyond it, at the ghosts of my family and the echoes of their laughter. They'd tried to destroy my legacy. But what they didn't understand was that the moment they lit that fire, they'd burned the last bridge back to redemption, and I was ready for the final act. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring through the window at what was left of the barn, a charred skeleton against the pale dawn. The air still smelled of smoke and betrayal. My fingers shook as I held Helen's photo. The glass cracked from the heat. Her smile seemed to whisper from the ashes, "Finish it, Tom." I was old, but not finished. Not yet. By morning, the sheriff called again. "We found tire tracks near the property line," he said. "Looks like your grandsons paid you another visit." I didn't lie. They did more than visit, Avery. They tried to erase me. "You want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "Let them dig their own graves first." And that's exactly what they did. 3 days later, a man in a gray suit showed up at my door. Not the same slick lawyer as before. This one was younger, nervous. He handed me an envelope. "Mr. Walker, your grandsons have filed a civil claim. They're accusing you of fraud and elder abuse." I chuckled. Elder abuse? By who? Me or them? He didn't answer. He just swallowed hard and left. It was almost funny. The desperation. They'd burned my barn to the ground and still thought they could shame me into giving up what little I had left. They didn't realize that the fire hadn't destroyed my legacy. It had revealed it. You see, before Helen died, we'd buried something under that barn. Something no one else knew existed. Not money, not gold, memory. We had sealed a metal box under the foundation. A time capsule of sorts. Old photographs, letters, her wedding ring, and a small recording she'd made for me 1 week before she passed. "For when the world forgets what love feels like," she'd said. After the fire, the box had been scorched but not destroyed. The metal was blackened, but the contents survived. And inside, alongside Helen's voice, was something else. A handwritten note from me that I'd forgotten about. My handwriting, younger, shakier, but full of purpose. It read, "If this land ever burns, let it cleanse the greed, not the good. Let what's buried rise again." That line hit me like lightning, because the day before the fire, I'd told Grady to activate the trust, and part of that trust included a clause that would release all remaining property records, geological surveys, and ownership deeds to the public archive if the barn were destroyed under suspicious circumstances, which meant every record, including the copper deposit documents and the hidden ownership plots, was now public. By the end of the week, the county paper ran another headline. "Charity farm found to sit on millions in copper. Legacy gift could save hospital." The world saw me as a saint. My grandsons saw me as a curse they couldn't kill. And I smiled, because that's exactly what I wanted. They tried to contact me again. Calls, letters, threats. I didn't answer. Then one evening, Sheriff Avery showed up with an envelope. "They're gone," he said. "Left town last night. Probably can't show their faces after the investigation." "Investigation?" I asked. "Arson," he said simply. "We found traces of accelerant in the barn ruins. Their lawyer flipped." I nodded. "They'll blame each other now?" Avery hesitated. "You don't look happy about it." I poured him a cup of coffee. "I'm not happy, but I am finished." When he left, I sat alone in the quiet. The house felt too big for one man. Every creak, every whisper in the walls carried a memory of Helen. Her humming in the kitchen, her laughter drifting down the hall. I realized I'd spent years protecting what was never really mine to keep. Legacy isn't property, it's character. That night, I wrote my final letter, the one Grady would read at my funeral. To Lucas and Ryan, I was never your enemy. I only became what you made me. You wanted my land, but you never cared for what it stood for. You thought inheritance was about wealth. It's about worth. You burned a barn to get to gold, but you only uncovered truth. That land will feed children now, not greed. That was always the plan. You could have been part of it if you'd only remembered what family means. I forgive you, but I don't envy you. Because forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. And someday, when you're old, you'll know what it feels like to watch your own blood forget who you are. I folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it beside Helen's photo. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept through the night. 2 months later, my heart gave out quietly in that same chair. When Grady read my letter aloud at the town hall, people cried. Not for me, for what the story meant. For the kind of justice that doesn't shout but echoes. Lucas and Ryan didn't attend the funeral, but they saw the footage on the news. The Children's Hospital announcing the Helen Walker Foundation. The same foundation funded by the copper buried beneath the farm they'd tried to steal. The camera caught the unveiling of a bronze plaque outside the new wing. It read, "In memory of Thomas and Helen Walker, who believed love should outlive greed." A reporter later said an anonymous donation had been made to expand the program nationwide. Grady told me, before I left this world, that he thought he knew who it was, Ryan. Maybe guilt can plant something good after all. As for Lucas, word was he went bankrupt, chasing a real estate dream in the city. Some say he drinks too much and mutters my name whenever anyone brings up the word inheritance. I don't wish him pain, only understanding. Because one day, when he drives past that hospital, the one filled with laughter, with children healing under a roof built from the ashes of his greed, maybe he'll finally see what I was trying to teach him all along, that a man's legacy isn't what he leaves to his family, it's what he leaves in them. And that's the story of how an old man's revenge became redemption. Because I didn't burn them. I let them burn themselves. And in the glow of their fire, my love, your name still shines.